Well, here we are back with another cool conversation. So we're broadcasting this kind of all over the place today. Todd Falcone checking in. What's up, you guys? I'm kind of doing a thing where I'm bringing just different cool influencers, people in, and having some casual conversations about all sorts of stuff. We did one a couple weeks ago with a fun friend of mine, and today we're gonna do a little chat here with my buddy Chris Widener. I'm not going to do the full, the long bio, but let me just tell you, I've known Chris for over 20 years. He's performed over 10,000 speeches. He's written, I always get it wrong, I'll just say 20 plus books. I think it's 23 or 24 books. I mean, he's written more books than I can even think about writing. Worked directly with Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn, actually helped Jim co-author his last piece of work. So to be able to work with those two guys is amazing. Just a cool dude that's, specialty. Every time I think of you, Chris, man, I think about leadership and influence. And let's have a chat. What's up, brother?
Everything's great here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, the city that's fun to say.
It is fun to say, man. Chattanooga.
How do you get depressed saying Chattanooga?
Dude, what about when we lived in Sammamish?
Yeah, Sammamish or Issaquah. I'll tell you a funny story. We actually live in a little suburb called Ottawa. That's where we live now. Oh. And when we were thinking about moving from Scottsdale, I had spent the last 20-something years in the town called Issaquah. And Issaquah, for those of you who have never heard of it, it's actually the international headquarters for Costco. It started out as Kirkland, which is why their brand is Kirkland brand. That and nobody would want to buy Issaquah milk, but so it's Kirkland brand milk or whatever. So anyway, we're thinking about moving to Chattanooga, and we're looking at Chattanooga. We're looking at all the suburbs or whatever. And I told Denise, I said, there's only one suburb I refuse to live in. And she said, which one's that? And I said, Ooltewah. The L is silent. It's Ooltewah. I said, Ooltewah. And she goes, why? And I said, because I spent 20-something years in Issaquah, and I had to tell everybody how to pronounce it. I had to spell it out when I was telling why can't we live in Red Bank, Tennessee, or, someplace like that, something easy. Well, where did we end up buying a house? Ooltewah, Tennessee. So that's where we live.
Yeah. So, and how are you liking it there? I know you're digging it in Tennessee, right?
We love Tennessee. I mean, Tennessee's great. It's slower paced. You got Nashville, which is fast paced, upscale. You'll see Ferraris and Rolls and stuff like that in Nashville, Brentwood, Franklin area. Here, it's older money. It's trucking is the biggest. The biggest industry here is trucking. It's a great little city. It's a great town. We like it.
Yeah. I love the state. I don't know. I don't think I've been to Chattanooga personally, but Nashville. We spent some time in Nashville recently, which was super fun. So for my audience, like most of my audience is like, mostly entrepreneurs. A lot of people involved in network marketing and direct selling. A lot of people outside of it, business owners, and just cool folks. So, you're like, we titled this thing talking about influence and persuasion, and obviously that can be applied in and out of business and all sorts of different aspects of life. So yeah, man, I just want to I haven't actually seen you speak for a while. So just to kind of let you like tee it high and let it fly and just kind of talk to the folks about, give some value on that subject matter. How do we move people? How do we persuade? I mean, why is it important? Why do we,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, influence. I'll tell you how I ended up talking about influence. I was talking about leadership, and I was working with Jim Rohn, and the president of Jim Rohn International said, you should write a book on influence. And I said, why? Like I didn't know why. He said, Chris, I don't know anybody that knows more people or has more people in his phone, like, rock stars and professional athletes and Major League Baseball owners and senators and congressmen and, all this kind of stuff. And I had really never thought about it. I had never thought about it. And he said, especially given your upbringing and how troubled it was, and now you've gotten to this point where you have this influence, and I just went, oh, I'd never thought about that before, but he's a really great marketer, and I was thinking to myself, well, okay, maybe I should maybe I should think about this. So I took about 6 months and I studied influence and I read books and I watched videos and, I started actually looking at a lot of the people who I work with. In my coaching practice, I've had lots of very successful people, and all that kind of stuff. And so I just said, what is it that makes somebody influential? And one of the really interesting things was just this whole idea of what is influence. So I always use this as the basic working definition, is that influence is the ability to change another person's thoughts, beliefs, and actions. If you can change another person's thoughts, beliefs, and actions, you have influence. And if you can't, you don't. And really, it's not so much that you have influence or you don't have influence. It's the gradient at which you can influence other people. For example, I'll use this as a sort of the way I usually tell it is if I met somebody brand new, and I was dressed relatively decent and I'm moderately good looking. My hair's in place, I'm well kept. And I said to somebody, hey, I know we've just barely met, but, could I borrow $5? I have no money for gas to get home. Almost everybody, even if I just met them, is going to give me $5. I have $5 worth of influence with almost anybody. And frankly, depending upon who the person is and all that, I could probably, especially if I told them, who I was, what I do, just something like that, I might even be able to get $50 out of somebody. But if I just met somebody and said, hey, could I get 10 grand? Nobody would give me 10 grand. I don't have that kind of influence. Now, if Floyd Mayweather just met somebody and said, dude, I lost my wallet, I need 10 grand. A lot of people would probably give Floyd Mayweather 10 grand because they know he's capable of giving it back and probably would be very gracious and thankful and maybe even give you 20 back, right? So there's some influence from his fame and fortune and all that kind of stuff. But, Todd, you and I've known each other for 20 something years. If I called you up and said, man, I am in an absolute pinch, blah, 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 I could probably get considerably more out of you because we have relationship. I have more influence with you. That's just a simple expression of how influence works. It's to the degree in which we can move other people. So some people, and there's two ways of looking at influence. You have a breadth of influence and you have depth of influence. So somebody might have a breadth of influence. Kim Kardashian, people like that, they have breadth of influence. They have the ability to reach 20 million people with a click of a button and probably move them. But what's the depth at which they could move them? Is it Kylie Jenner, I think, is one of the sisters or stepsister or whatever. She can move a lot of people to go spend $100 on makeup. But could she spend any of them to go spend 10,000 or 100,000 or $1 million? Probably not. So breadth versus depth. So what we want to do in business, I believe, is to grow in both directions. We want to be able to increase the breadth, how many people we influence, but we also want to create the depth of influence. What can I move people toward through my marketing or my speaking? And I don't mean like professional speaking, but just interacting with somebody. So to me, it's about finding out what it is that creates the breadth and what it is that creates the depth. And the breadth is usually just sort of people getting to know you and hearing your name. When I began to work with Jim Rohn, all of a sudden the breadth of my influence just took off, right? Because more people heard of me. In fact, one of the reasons I've spoken at like 500 network marketing conferences is because Jim had an exclusive deal with a network marketing company. And so when people would call, and it precluded him speaking anybody else. So people would call up and go, hey, we want Jim to come and speak at XYZ network marketing company. And they'd say, well, sorry, Jim can't do that. And then, typically you get upsold. Well, they got downsold. Well, but
I wouldn't call that
it's a downsell. It's a downsell, right? It's like, but we've got his protege, Chris Widener, who works with him, and blah, blah, blah. That's how I ended up. And then people would hear me and they'd hear me speak, and I gave great value and those kinds of things. So I increased the breadth, but I needed to increase the depth as well. And over the course of a number of years, my work allowed me to have the depth of influence as well as the breadth of influence. So lots of different ways that you can get there. And I'll sort of conclude with this and we can go forward. Is there's two primary ways that people consider, both at a conscious and a subconscious level, as to whether or not they're going to let you influence them. Because get this, you do not decide how much influence you have. Everybody else decides how much influence you have. And so what we need to do is we need to work on ourselves so that other people say, I want that person to influence me at a conscious or a subconscious level. By the way, I hear people use the term unconscious all the time. It's not unconscious, it's subconscious. Unconscious means you're like out.
Knocked out.
Is what takes place down here. Somebody recently, I kept hearing him use the word unconscious. I chuckled every time he said the word unconscious. But so those two things are your skill set and your character. So you need both to have influence. And I'll just kind of give you a brief little overview. If you have high skills but no character, you're a charlatan. But if you have high character and no skills, you're a good guy. Neither one of whom is going to have tons of influence. But if you have high skill set and high character, you're going to put yourself in that position where other people perceive you as a highly skilled person who they can trust. And that's what creates influence. So I tend to talk more on the character side than I do the skill set side, mainly because I've done tons of research. I've done this little thing that I've done it with 1 million people in crowds as large as 7,000, I think is the largest crowd I've ever done this with, where I ask people to write down words that describe leaders. And then I have them go around and they add them up and they put a character or a skill set next to it. And every single time I've ever done this with 1 million people, the vast majority of people, like 80-90% of the people, write down more character traits than they do skills. There are very few skills that you have to master to become a great influencer. There's a lot of character traits that you have to master in order to become a good influencer. So focusing on your skill sets and your character is really the best way to increase your ability to influence others.
So can we go back to that? But I want to and like dive into both of those. But one of the things when you started talking, you talked about like being on the street someplace and looking like not disheveled and, you know, fairly decent. And, you know, somebody you're like, you know, it looks like you got your stuff together, but you need $5 and your ability to get $5 from pretty much anything or anyone is simple. But then you got the dude that clearly is begging and desperate and, you know, his clothes look like they've been worn for 2 years. And it's interesting because there've been like social experiments done where a guy's dressed like that. Nobody wants to help him, but then he's dressed in a 3-piece suit and everybody talks to him. So it's interesting how just something like how you present yourself. And, you know, I know we're talking about like character and skill set, but I think there's like so many different levels of, you know, little things that we do that will make us influential. Like me, like, you know, it's kind of like if I'm just rolling like I normally roll, like I roll in a tie-dye t-shirt, flip-flops and shorts, and I look at like this bald hippie dude, you know, and I know that's, you know, if I'm dealing with somebody that doesn't know me, has no relationship with me versus, you know, and it depends also on the circle that I'm in. If I'm with a bunch of hippies, it's like I'm going to be influential with a bunch of hippies versus, you know, I'm with this business group of people because I found myself in those situations. I'm wearing a tie-dye shirt and I'm not necessarily in a bunch of suits, but I'm around people talking about business. And in some cases, if they don't know who I am, they're going to take me less seriously. Or if I got a tattoo on my arm or, you know, just, you know, dirt underneath your fingers, it's just interesting how many different things come into play with, you know, how you're going to be able to have some degree of influence over people in addition to like what you're talking about with character.
And it depends on the group you're talking to. I'll give you an example. I used to live in Seattle. That's where Todd and I met, was up in Seattle. And I became very good friends with a guy who at the time was the chief financial officer of the Seattle Mariners. He ended up becoming the president of the Seattle Mariners. And he was brought in from the Minnesota Twins to build Safeco Field, to oversee Safeco Field. So he comes in, he's building Safeco Field. And of course, you know, he is a suit and tie guy, right? I mean, he is always in a suit and tie. And he gets to Seattle where it's, you know, Microsoft country, right? Where, you know, it's dressed down, not dressed down Friday, it's dressed down Monday through Friday. And so everybody's busting his chops. And so they had to go to a bank. They were going to borrow $100 million for a bridge loan or something to build Safeco Field. And they get in there and he demanded that his team wear suits and ties that day. So they all show up. They sit down at the side of the table. The bankers show up on the other side of the table and they're all wearing suits and ties. And he says, hey, will you guys just humor me for a minute? And they said, yeah. And he said, can I ask you a question? And he's asking the bankers, and his team's all sitting here. And he goes, when somebody shows up to ask you for $100 million, do you prefer that they wear suit and ties? And the guys laughed and they said, we prefer they wear suit and ties if we're going to give them $100 million. And he looks at his team and said, see, that's why you wear suits and ties. But you know what? You show up somewhere else wearing a suit and tie, you know, if you're at a hippie convention, they'd be like, dude, did he not get the memo? We're hippies. You're speaking at a hippie convention.
I was speaking in Hawaii, and everybody in Hawaii, I mean, you're wearing shorts and aloha shirt or a t-shirt and flip-flops. And I had spoken to this group multiple times, and I know the vibe, you know, it's the Hawaii vibe, right? And the CEO of their company shows up, and we did a multiple island speaking tour. The first time he was all suited and tied up, and he was sweating bullets. And then we went to another island, and he still wore the suit and tie. And then we went to the third island, and he got rid of the tie. And we finally got to, I remember we were on the big island. We were in this place that was not air conditioned. And he was finally rolling with shorts, aloha shirt, flip flops, and it was crazy because you could see the audience was vibing over there. Like, who's the suit that they're bringing in? So sometimes you can, clearly overdress and not have influence in the opposite direction. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's know your audience, right? Because what are they really influencing people is about, I wouldn't say controlling, but it's about what other people are thinking. I was telling somebody I guess it was today at lunch, I was talking, is oftentimes when I'm working with somebody, I will do the exact opposite of what I think they expect. And I'll give you an example. I wanted to write a book with a guy once, and I had never met him. I maybe talked to him on the phone or something like that, and very successful guy. And I went down to meet him and came back, and Denise said, did you pitch him on the book? And I said, no, didn't even mention it. She goes, well, why not? And I said, because he expected me to. That's why not. Because think about that, right? If somebody expects you to sell them and you do, they go, yeah, I knew he was going to sell me. Yeah, I knew it. Go somebody, I knew it. I knew he was going to sell me. All he wanted to do is get together and sell me. If you don't, but you have a great conversation and great time, then he goes home to his wife, or she goes home to her husband and says, yeah, it was really weird. He didn't even try to sell me. What a great guy. Think about the difference. Think about the difference, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes influencing people is doing the exact opposite of what they expect you to do. So you do the opposite. And then that way they just go, it's the difference between, I knew it. You could do the exact same thing, exact same speech, or do nothing at all. And it's the difference between, I knew he was going to try and sell me, and wow, I really liked him. Big difference. So, then you sell them later on.
That like falls in with like, the having skill sets are important, having characters important, and you're trying to, let's say, okay, I'm on a sales call with somebody, for example, or I'm prospecting somebody for my consulting service or my business or whatever. And like your willingness to be like, Chris, I'm not even entirely sure this is for you. The classic takeaway, if you will, it's like they're expecting you to go for the close to try to convince them to be all promotional. And then when you have, and I think what it is, you're exuding enough confidence around what it is, the value proposition, if you will, that you're marketing to this individual, that you are totally okay with, hey, whether you join me or not, or sign up with me or buy my product or not, I'm totally cool. And it makes them think, they're like, wait a second, he must have something if he's willing to walk away so easily. So that kind of goes right into, character traits, and these like two things, characters and skills, because I mean, that to me is like, okay, a character trait, or one of them certainly would be having a high degree of confidence, not arrogance. I think you can verge into arrogance, but that can serve you. I mean, so for somebody that's, we have people that are here that are in, most of these people are in different businesses, right? And it is all about influence and how we can move people to, change their actions or their decisions or whatever. How do we go developing these areas? Like, how do I be, okay, I'm coming to you, Chris. I'm like, hey, I don't really feel like I'm that influential. I know I need to have more influence to get more followers, more viewers, more clients, more whatever. How do I go about actually improving my ability to do so?
Well, I want to add one other thing before we talk about specifically character and skills, and that's sometimes you just let the product do the talking for you. Now, the problem is most products don't talk well enough, right? There's a lot of products people are trying to sell that just don't sell themselves. I'll tell you, the first sale I ever made, I was 14 years old, And my mom was working at Group Health Hospital on Capitol Hill in downtown Seattle. And she worked with this guy who I thought was old, but now he was like 45 when I think about it. And this guy was a medical record filer. That's all this guy did for 40 hours a week. I cannot imagine a worse job in the world, taking medical records and alphabetizing them in a hospital for a job. So anyway, this guy decided he wanted to make some extra money. So he spent $7,000 and he bought the rights to a self-watering flower pot. Now, the way this flower pot worked was it was Tupperware, that kind of hard plastic kind of feel with like a design on the outside. It was like a bowl. And the bowl, you put the water in. And then it had another bowl that sat down inside of it like this. And that's where the plant was. The dirt was in that, and it sat down and had like a little nipple that went down from the top one down into the bottom one with a plastic cap with a lever on the side. So if it was on the far left, it would barely take any water. And if it was on the far right, it would take in a lot of water. And so, cactus, you'd put it on the far left, African violet, you'd put it on the far right. And so the guy says to me, "Hey, Chris, how would you like to make a little extra money?" I said, "I'd love to make a little extra money." He says, "Great. I have the license to sell these self-watering flower pots." I said, "Perfect. How much will you pay me per flower pot?" He said, "I'll pay you $1 a pot." I said, "Done deal." So give me a pot to use as an example. Now, this guy thought I was going to go door to door talking to little old ladies. But I decided, and this has always been my thing, right? It's just as easy to think big as it is to think small. And I've been doing it since the very first sales call I ever made. I called up the largest home improvement chain in the Pacific Northwest. Now, this was long before Eagle and Home Depot and Lowe's and all that. This was back when you had, Ace Hardware was probably the biggest chain at the time, but this was a regional chain. They had few hundred stores in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana and Alaska. And so I called them up and I said, "I would like to come and talk to your buyer, and I'd like to show them a self-watering flower pot." And they said, "Come on in. Your guys, Joe Schmo, come on in. Your appointment's at 4:00 on Tuesday." So my mom goes out and buys me my first ever blazer. So I got my first little.
How old are you?
I'm 57.
No. How old are you then?
14. I was 14. She buys me a little blazer, drops me off on the street corner in downtown Seattle at like 3rd and Pine or something like that. 5th and Pine something. And I go in and this guy goes like this because I'm a 14-year-old kid, right? And I walk in. I mean, I had no influence whatsoever because I'm a 14-year-old kid wearing a blue blazer that hasn't been tailored. It's like probably looked like a box, like most boys who were 14 wearing a suit. So I go in. No, I didn't have any dirt in the top part, but I filled the bottom part full of water. I set the other thing in there. I said, "See that?" He goes, "Yeah." And I went like this, and I moved the lever, and he says, "I'm a buyer. So I'll make you a deal. I want to test this in 20 stores." And I said, "Okay, so what do you want?" He goes, "I want, how many in a box?" I said, 24. He said, "I want 4 boxes for 20 stores every month. And I'll do a test for a year." Now let's just call it 25 to a box. It's easier to do the math. That's 100 per store times 20 stores. That's 2,000 a month for a year. I sold 24,000 flower pots the first time I ever made a sales call in any business in my entire life. And it was because I just let the product do the talking. I went, "Here it is. There's the water. Stick that in there, move the lever." And he goes, "I see it. Let's do it." So the funny thing is, and this is a great lesson on success, I went back to the guy and I said, "I sold some pots." And he goes, "Really? How many did you sell?" And I said, 23,842 or whatever the number is when you take it back to 24 a box. And he goes, "Huh?" And I told him exactly what I did. Now, I kid you not. This guy was so terrified of success, he called the company up, the flower pot company, and asked for his money back and gave up the rights to the flower pot. Now, in hindsight, I don't know why my mother didn't beg, borrow, and steal to find $7,000 so we could cut the deal. Because if I was making $1 a pot, who knows how much he was going to make on those. But he was terrified. It terrified him to think that he would be making that much money. So anyway, it was kind of, I mean, and it wasn't really even that much money. Let's say he made $3 a pot. 2,000 pots a month. That's $6,000 a month. It's not that much money, but he was used to making like 2,000 a month being a filer, and it just blew him away. So sometimes you just have to let your product speak. But back to the original discussion, there are very few skill sets you have to master. There's quite a bit of character that you have to master. And I would say that they probably also have a layer of importance, right? So when people say, what's the most important ability or skill set? I always say it's communication. You can get away with a lot. If you can communicate, it's the biggest skill set that you need to have in order to influence people. You have to be able to communicate, articulate what it is that you want to influence. If you're just a bunch of gobbledygook when you talk and people can't figure it out, you're not going to convince anybody. You're not going to have any influence. But on the other side of things, I would say the number one is always the number one, and the others you can kind of put in whatever order you want. But the number one character trait is integrity. And integrity is what causes trust. And if you don't have integrity, you're not going to be able to influence long term. You can influence short term, but not long term. And the reason why is because a skill set is you see skills before you see character. So if I sat down at a table full of people, 6 or 8 people, we're at a conference, and they go, hey, discuss this for the next 20 minutes. I could probably pretty quickly determine levels of skill set. Oh, she's really good communicator. He's really good with math. He's really good at strategic thinking. Like, I could figure skill sets out pretty quickly by listening to them talk. I would have no idea whether they were honest or not.
Yeah.
So character resides inside, and it takes longer. This is the curse of the politician, right? And I always say this: I'm an equal opportunity, nonpartisan political basher. I will use 2 presidents. I'm not really, but for my speeches, I am.
Yeah.
Let's take a Republican and a Democrat who achieved the highest office in the land, president of the United States, leader of the free world, tremendously skilled, completely undone by their lack of character. And I'll start out with a Republican. If I say, Republican, everybody's going to say Richard Nixon. They all know Nixon, the only guy to ever resign the office. He resigned in shame. I mean, I'm telling you, though, Nixon would be rolling over in his grave right now. He'd be, I resigned for what? I can't believe it. These guys. But you think about it, Nixon was really smart and highly skilled. In fact, after he resigned, all the future presidents used to call him up because he was so smart, particularly in terms of international stuff, right? Wrote a bunch of books that were really good. He opened up communication with China, founder of the EPA, like lots of different things, right? Highly skilled, undone by character. And then probably the second smartest guy to ever hold the presidential office, Thomas Jefferson, I'm always going to say is probably number 1, was Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, Rhodes Scholar, brilliant guy. And for all of his hillbilly, hey, boy, Jolly G. Whitakers, he was a brilliant, smart guy and oozing with charisma. I know a guy who hates Bill Clinton, like can't stand Bill Clinton, the name Bill Clinton, anything, but he's a billionaire. And he was invited to meet with Bill Clinton, and it was going to be a small group, 3 or 4 people. He said, oh, I can't believe I got to go meet with this guy. Oh, boy, right? He comes home and he goes, dude, I'm telling you, he called Bill Clinton something fascinating. He called him a black hole of charisma. He said, this is a black, he actually said, there is something spiritual about that. And I don't know that it's necessarily good spiritual. He said, I went into that room hating the guy. I've loathed him, what he's done. But and people say this about Bill Clinton, you feel like you are the center of the universe when you're talking to him. In fact, it's interesting. If you look at pictures of Bill Clinton, like when he's talking, he does this. It's fascinating. He does this. He goes, oh, he's always saying this. And he just,
in amazement.
You are the most amazing person. And you just feel this desire to, which is probably why he was very good with women, right? He had this charisma about him. But he was also not good with women in many ways. And that was his undoing. I mean, this guy was brilliant. He was smart. He was charismatic. He was, as far as Democrats go, he was moderate. You know, he's the guy that coined the term, let's keep abortion safe, legal, and rare. You know, he wasn't an extremist on either side. You know, I think some of the best years we've ever had were when Clinton was president and Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House, because they were both strong personalities and they had to work things out together. But he was undone because of the Monica Lewinsky thing, right? Yeah. And I have a friend who was in politics, and he always says, Chris, here's the rule. The rule is the press is going to hit you with a hammer. Just don't be the guy to give them the hammer. And Bill Clinton was handing out hammers left and right. Yeah. And so you have to have, you can influence for a while with a skill set, but ultimately influence is based on trust. And once people realize that you're not the kind of person they can trust, they rescind your ability to influence them. And, you know, so it's important to have both.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. You know, I want to make sure people, like, because I've done a lot of teaching on the subject of charisma, which is a really important component to influence. And I believe charisma can be taught. Now, granted, some people naturally have this, there's something about them, like in the case of like Bill Clinton, he's just, he is what he is. But the interesting thing you said about that is like this whole thing of him, like, leaning in and you're the most important person in the world. And that's like, if you guys just think about that, if you're like, hey, I want to be more charismatic, well, the more you focus on somebody that you actually hear, that you pay attention, that you listen to what they're doing, and they're like, oh my gosh, this person actually truly cares about what the heck I'm saying, the better listener you are, which is also a skill set in communication. People will almost literally fall all over you to be around you because you are so different than everybody else, which automatically just that one little component makes you that much more influential. Now, of course, your charisma has got to be, you got to be doing things the right way. You don't want to be doing it in a negative way.
But, well, do you know what charisma literally means? What the literal breakdown, I think they call it the epitomology or etymology of the word charisma is?
I don't. I know what the definition is, but I don't. I'd love to hear the etymology. Yeah, I think that's bugs. Isn't that bugs entomology?
I think it is. I love words. Like I love the word confidence means with. Con is a prefix which means with, and I know that because I used to eat a lot of chili con carne. And fide means faith. It's the Latin word for faith. So confidence means with faith. So when people say, "How can I be more self-confident?" I say, self-confidence is what you have faith in yourself about. So if you said to me right now, if Todd said to me right now, hey Chris, big surprise, I have 1 million people waiting in the room online. They're waiting for you to talk. Are you ready to go? I'd say, let's go. I have you put 1 million, you could have 500,000, 10 million, wouldn't matter to me. Live stage, 200,000 people, walk me out there, whatever. Doesn't matter to me. In fact, I did a series of events a couple of years ago, 7 events with 45,000 people. And there were oftentimes we were waiting for speakers, and the people I was working with would say, you need to get on stage and kill 12 minutes. Up the stage I went, killed 12 minutes, no problem. But you asked me to sing the national anthem, never going to happen, because you do not want me to sing the national
anthem. Should we do it together right now? I mean, we can both butcher it.
I have no confidence in it. So I love words like that. Integrity, we talked about earlier. Integrity literally shares the root word with the word integer. It means that you have a wholeness about you. It means that you are complete and undivided. It means you have a single set of morals, ethics, and values. So I love words. My mom taught me to love words. But charisma literally means gifts of grace. Charismata, gifts of grace. When you have charisma, it means you have the gift of grace. And I'll give you an example talking about, being a listener. I have a thing that I do when I eat with people. So I go to lunch, it's a business meeting, whatever. There's a little thing that you can monitor while you're conversing that will tell you whether or not you're being a listener or not. Do you know what it is? It's how far along you and the guy across from you are in your meal. Because if you're talking, you're not eating. So my goal when I'm in a meeting where I'm trying to influence and approach somebody is to get through my food before they get through their food.
Yeah. You're done. I'm done.
That means I'm listening. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's interesting. Tell me more. What about this? And I'm shoveling food. They can't eat because they're commanding the conversation.
Oh, that reminds me of a narcissist that just is like, sits down, has a fork in hand. I've finished. I'm ready for seconds. And they're like, haven't even taken their first bite. Just talk.
It's a great way to monitor. And I do it. I did it the other day. And he was like further along than me. And I literally thought to myself, shut up and start eating. That's what I thought to myself. Shut up and start eating. You're going to be a lot better off if you shut up and start eating and let him do more talking.
This is good, man. So, yeah. So integrity, communication, like what are like,
optimism is always my second.
How do you get optimism? Like, how do I become optimistic if I'm not optimistic? Do I just decide I'm going to be optimistic? I mean,
well, so I'll do a little thing that I do in my speeches. Let's break down the word optimism. The root word is opt. And there's two things that I do to remind myself of what optimism means. When you opt to do something, you're what?
Choosing to.
Right. And if you think about the word opt in relation to a medical profession, you would think of an optometrist or an ophthalmologist, and they are people who deal with the eyes. So the way I remember what optimism is it is choosing to see the good in everything. It doesn't mean that you say everything's great. It means you choose to see the best in everything. And I'll give you an example. It doesn't mean that you're not a realist, because sometimes people, I'm neither an optimist nor a pessimist, Chris. I'm a realist. Well, and I'm always like, well, good for you. La-di-da. You're a realist. But you can be a realist and still be an optimist or a pessimist. And the example is a football coach. It's halftime. Come in, you're down 21-0. And the coach says, you guys are a bunch of sad sack losers. I can't believe it. These guys are kicking your tail from one end of the field to the other. You threw bad balls. You didn't catch the balls. You didn't make your tackles, and you didn't make your blocks. I don't even know why we're going back out on the field. You guys stink. Now sit down and shut up, and we're going to go out on the field. We're going to get our hind end kicked today. That's a realist. 21-0. You got your hind end kicked. And then I'm telling you, you suck, and you're probably going to get your hind end kicked when we go back out on the field. Different coach comes in and says, guys, terrible first half, guys. I mean, we're the better team here. We are better than that team, but they beat us. They're up 21-0. Joe, you didn't throw good passes. Tom, you didn't catch those passes. Bill, you didn't make your tackles. And Roger, you didn't make your blocks. But you're better than that team. Now, I'm telling you, if we get back out there and if we make our blocks and we make our tackles and we catch those balls and we get good passes, you're the better team. We can get out there. Here's the good news. They beat us by 21 points in that first half. The only thing we have to do is beat them by 22 points this half, and we're going home the winners. Now let's get back out there and play up to the speed that we can play. He's also a realist. We got our hind ends kicked. We're down 21-0, but he chooses to project optimism rather than pessimism. And I do believe that it's a choice. And I do believe that there are people who are naturally pessimistic, but I also believe that you can choose to make something good out of anything. And perfect example of that is the woman who lost her daughter and started Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. I cannot imagine for the life of me anything worse than losing a child. And thank God I have 6 kids and they're all great. They're all healthy and nothing better than that, right? My heart goes out to anybody who's lost a child. I mean, people I don't even know. I'm reading the news and some famous celebrity, I have nothing in common with LeBron James. Nothing. I don't agree with him on virtually anything. But I tweeted to him yesterday and I said, LeBron, or at King James, you and I agree on almost nothing except that we love your children. We love our children. I'm praying for your boy. Because I just cannot imagine what that would mean. But this woman said, what if I could keep this from happening to some other mother? And she started something that went internationally. She chose to see the good that could come from the loss of her daughter's life. And how much then easier is it for us to see the good, even in something marginal that might happen to us on a daily basis, right? And so if you're not naturally optimistic, I'm probably too naturally optimistic. In fact, I need people to tell me, no, you're way too optimistic. You trust people way too much. That's what Denise always tells me that. Like when I first met Denise, like I didn't even use contracts. Like I just handshake deals. I've done millions of dollars of deals with handshakes. I've also gotten screwed a few times because I did handshake deals. So I'm sort of naturally optimistic. But I do believe that you can work on your optimism, and it's choosing to see the good in any situation.
Can I throw you a curveball real quick?
Yeah, I would love it if you would.
So, I mean, we both are, fathers. We love our children. I mean, that tweet that you sent out to LeBron, and the worst loss that somebody could ever have, or one of the greatest losses, is like the loss of a child, right? And this, Mother for Mothers Against Drug Drivers, and I know you're a man of faith, and one of the biggest struggles. I'm just curious, if something terrible happens in your life, like you lose a child, that no child should pass before their parents.
No. And
you're a person of faith, and you're like, well, why the heck would God do this to me? That's like something that a lot of people struggle with. I had a conversation with a friend of mine this morning that's, dealing with a child that is struck with an illness at a very young age. And it's like, we like hour before you and I were on here, we were talking about it. How do you wrestle with that? I know that's off the subject of influence, but you kind of brought that up. So
it's an easy answer that's terribly difficult to implement. And I'll tell you this, if someone loses a child, you and I sitting here philosophically, I can tell you almost instantaneously what the answer is. But if I'm sitting across from a grieving mom and dad, I would never say this. I would be nothing but but here's the deal. There's a number of sort of thoughts to think about this. And that is, everybody dies, right? Everybody dies. I'm going to die. I'm closer to death today than I was yesterday, and I will be even closer tomorrow. Same with you. We all die. We all know we die, but somehow we've attached this thing that, dying at 10 is worse than dying at 70 or 90. But the reality is we're all going to die anyway. Right. So I'm just thinking philosophically. I'm not trying to be harsh here, but I'm trying to just tell you how I process it in my brain. The other thing is, as a Christian, I believe in sin and righteousness and these kinds of things. And of course, anybody who's read the Bible or, Christian faith, we believe in original sin. And, the Bible says the wages of sin is death, but the free gift of life or free gift of God is life in Christ, those kinds of things. Right. So everybody dies. It's the penalty for sin, right? So we live in a sinful world. Doesn't even necessarily mean that child sinned, because how does a 6-week-old sin? They don't. But it's the nature of living in a world that is not the way it was designed. Originally, I believe we're designed to live eternally, and then sin entered the world, and therefore we suffer it. And that people may or may not agree with that, but that is historical Orthodox Christianity. And I mean Orthodox with a lower O, not a big O with the hats and the things that they swing. And so in many ways, I would think, the reality is oftentimes we would say, why did God let me live so long? Like my dad was 41 when he died, and I was 4. And I've always had this very real sense of death and how death was going to come to all of us. But now if I was sitting across from a grieving parent, I wouldn't say, well, I know that it's a loss at 6 weeks old, but here's the deal. We all die. You would never do that. It's easy to philosophize, but it's terribly difficult to implement. If I was sitting with somebody who lost a child, I would just be, I am so sorry. What can I do? I'm here for you. It's that compassionate side. But that's really basically the simple answer. The simple answer is we all live in a world where we die. And to us, 80 years seems so long. But, in the book of James in the Bible, it says we're all but a mist. We're all just a mist. It's like, if you take a puff of a cigar, bring in your cigar, it starts out, the cigar is this hard, tangible wrapper with tobacco in it, and you light it on fire and it converts into smoke, and the smoke is condensed as you blow it out, and it's thick and you can see it, but give it 3 or 4 seconds and it just dissipates.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at life. We go from this physical, hard, tangible thing, this body, that we can touch. And when we die, we dissipate, and we dissipate into heaven or, wherever we go to exist. I don't know that there's a place. I don't think we're bound by time and space when we die. And so, I think having a larger than this world perception of where this world exists in the overall scope also allows us to think about death and those kinds of things. But again, terribly difficult to say to a woman who just lost her husband. You would never do that. In fact, I tell people, most people don't know this. I should probably tell this because they're like, wow, this guy really knows the Bible. I was a pastor for 14 years, spent a lot of time with grieving people. And I tell people all the time, don't give anybody an answer. I know that you want to. I know you want to assuage their fears and their pain. Don't say, well, he's in a better place now. It doesn't matter.
No,
it doesn't matter that he's in a better place, because the only place that woman wants her husband to be is there. Yeah. The only place that couple wants their child to be is in that baby's crib. So don't say any of that. The best you can say is, I'm so sorry. I'm here for you.
Yeah.
Which is why I tweeted to LeBron James, a guy who I really don't like at all, because it touched my heart. I cannot even imagine the fear that man must have gone through, even with his billions of dollars, or, his Nike deals and all this kind of stuff, and fame and fortune, greatest scorer of all time. Well, if Wilt Chamberlain would have played this amount of time, he'd have 4,000 more points than LeBron, but I'm not going to try to convince the youngsters that Wilt is actually the greatest player of all time.
Yeah.
But none of that could save him from the terror that he had, thinking that his boy might die. His namesake, LeBron Jr.
Yeah. Well, that was on my mind, and so we don't have any rules when we do these conversations. I made a decision about a month ago. I'm just going to start, like I said at the beginning of this, bringing people on and just.
I love it. I think it's what made Joe Rogan so popular. He just gets on there and shoots it for.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that was my thought. Is like, I listened to a lot of Joe. I'm not trying to be Joe Rogan or anything, but just to sit back and have a conversation about whatever. So you and I kind of.
But think about this. Everybody's like, oh, you got to keep your videos short and tight and da-da-da. No, you don't. The number one video every single day on the internet is a guy talking for 3 hours with another guy.
Yeah.
People have the capacity to listen. You have to have the capacity to engage. And if you can engage, then they'll listen. For like, the greatest compliment anybody ever pays me when I'm done speaking was, wow, that 90 minutes went by so fast. Or that I never can listen to people for an hour, but I listened to you for an hour. That to me says I've crafted I've honed my craft to the point where people will actually listen to me and engage. And I actually use techniques in order to keep people engaged. So I work at it, and I'm naturally gifted, and I work at it, and those kinds of things. But no, people will listen for a long time if you give them something to listen to.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think of, like, because we're, on the subject of influence, right? And okay, so I'm putting together a sales letter to market, some training program, and somebody's like, those long form sales letters, those don't work anymore. I'm like, actually, they're some of the most effective ways to sell something. If you were to, it's literally a single website that if you were to link that out is like this massively long thing. And why do they? Well, they work when it's, clearly effective communication. It's interesting, it's engaging, versus this 2-sentence description of what you're trying to sell them. That's way less effective. But I mean, it kind of goes.
Have you heard about Stansberry Research?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Stansberry Research is brilliant. Now, for those of you who don't know what Stansberry is he's a financial advisor, and he sells ways to make more money or protect your money. And it usually you usually run up against Stansberry Research because you're reading some sort of a financial magazine that says, it basically is this: the earth is going to hell in a handbasket in the next 3 months, and the only people that will survive the apocalypse are the people that watch this video. And you're like, holy cow, I don't have my prepper kit. I better watch this video. Click. This video, if you click it, the only thing you can do is turn it on and off. You have no idea how long this video is going to go. When you click pause, there's no little thing at the bottom and you go, oh, okay, it's 20 minutes. I got to give 20 more. These things are so long, and they go forever and ever and ever and ever. And you're just like, when is this thing going to end? But you watch it till the end. And I mean, some of them are an hour long, but the whole theory of the long sales letter is that, very few people will get through to the end, but almost all of them who do will buy from you. That's the theory of the long sales letter. And Stansberry has made hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars doing that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, could I listen to this speaker for 12 hours or would I take a nap for 12 hours? I mean, there are certainly speakers. I'm not going to mention any by name, professional speakers. I can listen to you for about 10 minutes and then I'm like literally ready to take a nap. And then there's people like, if I listen to them, I'm going to be so awake, I'm not going to be able to go to sleep when I'm done. So, this whole conversation of influence, I mean, that's a totally different conversation as far as speaking and presentation skills. That would actually be we should come back and do a chat about, just because both of us have been on thousands of stages. And I don't know if you've seen this show or not, but this would be interesting. There's a show, I think it's called Laugh Talk or Funny Talk or something. And it's Jerry Seinfeld, Louis C.K., Chris Rock, and there's a handful of these like comedians, and they're literally sitting in this like 15 by 15 foot room, sitting around having chats about their stuff, their sets and their creation of sets and how they just do, it was so incredibly, and I'm not a comedian necessarily. I mean, I try to make people laugh when I'm on stage a lot, but it's just really interesting to hear all these people talk about their craft.
Well, I'll tell you what we should do. We should start a public speaking school. I don't know if people can comment on this, but if you'd like a public speaking school, if you want Chris and Todd to put together a public speaking school, comment, let us know.
Yeah, no, that would be, that'd be fun.
It truly is. I do believe that public speaking is something that people can learn. And frankly, I think everybody ought to be able to give a speech. If you're a realtor, you need to be able to give a speech. If you're an accountant, you need to know how to and write a book. I tell realtors and mortgage people and accountants, like everybody should have a book. If you're a realtor and you have a book called, 7 things you must do before you sell your home, eventually people are going to go, we're going to list our house. We should go with that lady who wrote the book. She's the expert. The book makes you the expert.
Yeah.
Your ability to show up and communicate. It's why Toastmasters, I love Toastmasters. I've actually spoken at the International Toastmasters the year that Stephen Covey got the Golden Gavel. It was in, I think it was in Salt Lake City, if I remember correctly. But Toastmasters is pretty rudimentary though, right? They teaching you the basics of public speaking, not necessarily the basics of persuasive speaking. And those are the kinds of things that when you master those things, I'll give you one thing I tell people all the time. I haven't used a PowerPoint ever, as far as I can ever remember. And people will say, no PowerPoint? I go, could you imagine the greatest speeches in American history being given with a PowerPoint? And they go, huh? I go, yeah, imagine Martin Luther King Jr. on the Mall giving his I Have a Dream speech with a PowerPoint behind him. I have a dream. And that dream on slide 1, you'll see is little white children walking with little black children. And on screen 2, can we get to screen 2, please? My clicker isn't working. Could you imagine that? Right.
Well, what's funny about that is like, yeah, for sure. No, that sounds absolutely ridiculous to use a PowerPoint for a speech, right? But it's also interesting. I mean, we could be here for like, if we got into this, it'd be like we're finishing at like 7:00 tonight. But so like, for example, for me, when I get up on a platform, typically, I could have 90 minutes to 3 hours to speak, and I'm not giving a speech. I'm up there teaching, training, helping them acquire skill sets, adjust their mindset, whatever. And I do use PowerPoint slides that have a trigger word or 2 words on them or a few words, and I've seen people do this. They're like literally 4 paragraphs up on their screen, and they're literally going, "Oh yeah, I'm Todd, and I blah 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 blah."
I'll use this behind me as an example. Now, this is a Teddy Roosevelt quote, but it's not the quote that I'm about to say. This one is called The Man in the Arena. The credit goes to the man in the arena, not the people who are sitting out there taking pot shots. But one of my favorite quotes is a Teddy Roosevelt thing. Now, if I turn to you and I go, it's like my favorite Teddy Roosevelt quote. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how it's horrible. But if the quote were my favorite one and you say, far better it is to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, though checkered by failure, than to rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy nor suffer much, because they live in the gray twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat. Far better than turning around and reading it off a screen, right? Now, I do believe, and I'm not anti-PowerPoint, I'm just anti-PowerPoint for me, but if like I have a friend, Waldo Waldman, one of the best top speakers in America today, does over 100 gigs. He's Motivational Speakers Hall of Fame, the whole deal, right? He's a former fighter pilot. So he has stuff going on behind him while he's talking. He does this his whole thing is be a wingman, help people out. He has this video that he shows that was taken from inside this fighter jet, that these fighter jets were flying behind another fighter jet that had lost its engines. And they were on both wings flying in, and you're watching this whole thing happen. And, you're getting the whole radio, that whole thing, right? And it's really cool to see Waldo sort of talking with this thing going in the background about how they came alongside. When this guy said, my engines are out, boom, they came in on side to be the wingman, and they were telling him what's going on with this thing, and they got him landed. Because frankly, when it weighs that much, they really don't glide that well.
Yeah.
This guy they got him back onto the tarmac or the runway and got him in there. But so there is times I think that they work, but when all else fails, you want to just go with some smoke pots. That's the way to really keep
some smoking. Wait, what did you say?
No, look up here.
Wait.
That picture right there.
Smoking pot or smoke pot?
No. Smoke pot.
I know. I caught
that. Capture the crowd's attendance. Get smoke pots.
Yeah. Hey, so real quickly though, because I know we're over the time that you and I discussed this, but I think we should have a conversation about doing something together on the speaking and presentation and platform skills training. So yeah, okay, guys. So we'll get together. We'll get back to you on that. So. But brother, as you do when we do our thing on your thing, like any final thoughts or words before we wrap up today?
Yep, I'll tell you, because I do a lot of interviews, probably minimum of 3 a week, sometimes as many as 10 a week, and I always get this whole thing, final words or what's the best piece of advice you've ever gotten, and I found out that it was actually, and this actually happened. I'll tell you this story if I can take a minute or two to tell the story. I was a young man. I was 22 years old. I was at a conference. And I was a pastor, and it was like a ministry conference, and it was during a break time, and we're all kind of standing around, and I was there by myself. I didn't know anybody, so I'm just kind of standing there, and I kind of turn around and I see these two women. One was about 50, the other was about 30, and the young woman's face went like this when she saw me, and the woman, who I found out later was her mother, said, "Is that him?" And she goes. And I'm going, okay, this is just creepy.
Yeah.
And the mother says, in the middle of the night last night, she woke me up and said she had a dream, and she saw the face of someone, and she's supposed to give them a message. And I went, bring it on. Give me the message. And she said, I'm supposed to tell you to be a voice, not an echo. And that is the last I ever spoke to them. I didn't get their names. I don't know where they lived. I never stayed in touch with them. But that was 35 years ago.
Wow.
Be a voice, not an echo. Now, I have since tried to track that down. And from what I can see is it's Albert Einstein. But that just doesn't, like, everything gets credited to Abraham Lincoln and Albert Einstein. The quote going around now, 98% of all statistics on the internet are untrue. Abraham Lincoln, so, but I have kept that as my motto. What I have tried to do is to be a voice, not an echo. Yeah. To come up with my own stuff, my own take, and not just regurgitate what other people say. I can take what other people say, think it through, boil it down, and come up with my own stuff. But I think it's really important because, people know an original. and they can also spot a copy. And you know, I learned that from working with Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar. People ask me, probably the number one question I get on podcasts, what was it like? What did you learn working with Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn? And I tell always the same answer: be yourself. And people are like, be yourself? That's what you got from working with Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn? I said, yeah, think about it. These two guys were friends. They were contemporaries. They were the same age, essentially. They lived, you know, Jim had an office in Dallas. Zig lived in Dallas. They, at the time, public speaking wasn't that big, so it was a small world of the most popular speakers. And, you know, Jim Rohn was very professorial. In fact, I always like to joke that when Jim stood behind the podium when he taught, and very much like a college professor. And I always used to joke, you knew Jim was getting amped up when he'd made his power move, which was this. Oh, Jim took his readers off. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Whereas Zig, he would talk really loud and fast, and then he'd come on down. And he'd kneel on the front of the stage and he'd prance from one side to the other. And, you know, he was pumping that thing, you know, and everything. He was very different from Jim. And yet they both achieved the highest level of success. And so I realized in the early 2000s when I was working with them, I didn't need to be Jim Rohn and I didn't need to be Zig Ziglar. In fact, I'd be a terrible Zig Ziglar. I do a pretty good Zig impersonation. You just have to add an A to the end of every word and talk with a little Southern drawl. But I had to be myself. And so it was really good working with those guys, if for no other lesson than to realize you can get to the top. Pun intended, I guess. See you at the top.
Dang, there you
go. By being yourself, if you're an original. And that's what I always encourage people to be. Be an original, be yourself. Don't be a fake. Don't try to be Todd. Don't try to be me. Don't try to be your upline. Just be yourself. Be authentic, be transparent, and have integrity.
Well said, my friend. Well, Chris, thank you for hanging today. I'm sure the audience loved it. And what a great conversation. I'm going to have to keep doing these and we'll get back to you on the speaking thing.
Yeah,
but
that'd be fun to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe do a little 4-week thing or something like that. Basics of fundamentals of public speaking.
In fact, let's do it. Let's make it happen.
I'd love it.
All right, man. Listen, have a great day. We'll chat soon. Appreciate you guys watching. We'll see you next time.